I've talked in this class how I want to have a Zeller's Law, you know, like Murphy's Law or Moore's Law or whatever. And this might be another candidate for Zeller's Law. When we're talking about code, we're talking about programming. I think I've said this before, but I do want to emphasize it because this is important, and it's really going to be what we're going to talk about today to a large degree. Code that doesn't work is bad. You probably got that part, right? But what's hard sometimes, that does not mean that code that does work is good. All right. So, where we left off last time is we had a little currency conversion, and we did it in a reasonable way, and it worked. What we're going to do today is we're going to examine how we can make it better. And the process of examining that is called refactoring by a lot of people. They'll say refactor. And usually, when you hear someone talk about refactoring, usually they're not talking about like adding new functionality or changing the way something works. They're talking about taking something that works and makes it better. All right, so we're going to be refactoring our code here. And in refactoring the code, again, what does it mean to say that code is better? All right, it generally means, and again, we're not talking about user interface now. We're talking about the actual programming logic, the code. It generally means, number one, it is more maintainable. Number two, the cousin of maintainability is reusable. And number three is fault tolerant. Three we're going to forget about for now. All right, three we're going to put that one on the back burner, and we'll come back and talk about fault tolerance later on. All right. We did as much as we want to do with that by just putting validation in. That gets the job done in this particular case. So we're not going to worry about that one today. So, but that is another consideration as well. So more maintainable and reusable. All right. We're going to save reusable for a bit. We'll come back to that one towards the end of today's class, probably. All right. Let's talk about more maintainable. If we want to identify how we could make our code more maintainable, what would we do? How could we look at our code and try to determine that it could be made more maintainable?
Make sure that it's all neat, like, you know, all the stuff is in the, like, a nice straight line.
Okay.
So you look at it.
That's good. I guess that wasn't what I was thinking of, being a rather slovenly person, but one thing you could do is make sure that the code is readable. So that would include putting comments in, making sure your if statements are indented correctly, and all that kind of things. Yeah?
Use as little code as practically possible.
Uses as little code.
Sometimes those two will butt heads. It's readable and uses little code as possible.
Yeah. I will say this. This is often an effect of optimizing your code. It's not necessarily a goal. All right? In other words, my goal isn't to write the tersest code I can. My code is to write the most maintainable code I can. In writing more maintainable code, I am likely going to make it more terse, but not necessarily. That's not a goal unto itself. All right? And again, without going into specific examples, it can be hard to visualize. So I'm not saying that you're wrong per se, but this is usually the effect and not the goal. All right. So, for example, when we're done today, we're going to have less code, all right, than we had before. So yeah, and most of the time when you refactor, you're going to end up with that. All right. However, that's not necessarily why we're doing it and what we're shooting for. It's more of an effect, a side effect than a goal. Yes.
I would say branching off of that, maybe writing behind the scenes code to where you can call it, as a method.
Okay. One thing to do, and that in a way kind of relates almost to the second factor of reusability, but it also has an impact for maintainability, is looking at creating functions or methods. All right? Some other things that we would look for. Let's look at, did you ever?
No, sir.
Okay. Let's look at the code that we had last time. And let's look for things that we think we can do a better job on. If there were tests in this class, one of the questions would be, what does the new Visual Studio logo represent? What is the rhyme or reason for it?
Is that something to do with infinity?
I don't know.
Oh.
That's why I'm asking. Yeah.
It's a skewed bow tie.
Okay, I like that. What's the pasta farfalla? The bow tie? Yeah. That's my favorite. That's my favorite kind of pasta, actually. It's amazing how you can have a favorite kind of pasta because it's really the same thing,
Really?
right? So why would I? And I do. I strongly prefer every time I go to the store. That's the pasta I buy. Why not something else? I don't know. That's a good question.
Usability.
Reusability, right? There you go. See?
Put it in works.
Some pastas are made to hold sauces a little different.
Okay, all right, that's a good point. Maybe I like the sauce holding capabilities of the farfalla. All right, here's where we left off last time. I had a tough morning, so this could be a fun class. All right, I woke up with a splitting headache. It's kind of going away now. And my cat jumped on my laptop, knocking the laptop off, knocking off a key, and spilling coffee in the process. I was so mad.
Is the cat still alive?
Yes, I do not advocate cruelty to animals.
Yeah, I had that happen to a keyboard. I took it to the utility tub, soaked it in hot water, and let it sit for about 3-4 days. Plug it back in, worked fine.
I don't think the computer was damaged other than the key being off of it. I think the coffee that splashed on it was kind of superficial. It wasn't.
Mine was
Yeah.
down in there.
It's dead there.
You push a key down and it would stay.
A little sticky.
Nice. All right, let's look at our code behind here. Now, do keep in mind that my goal here isn't to teach you how to write the best currency conversion program here. We're looking for bigger lessons. We're going to use this as an example to look for bigger lessons. So if I'm looking to refactor this, here's a couple things I'm looking for. I'm looking for any time I see things duplicated, right? So for example, I see a 0.63 here, I see a 0.63 here, I see a 0.63 here, and I see a 0.63 there. So what does that mean? That means if that 0.63 changes, I got 4 places to change it. I got 4 places I could mess up. I've just increased my chances of messing up 400% of what it needs to be. All right. Now you might argue, well, this is a contrived example. We would never hard code a currency conversion rate because that changes every day and blah 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 blah. We'd be pulling that from a database. Yeah, but still, there's 4 places I could get that wrong. Even if I was doing something to call from a database, I'm doing it 4 places. All right, even if I were to change that. So Number one, you look for duplicated things. So look for duplicated values. That's an example of a duplicated value. The other thing I'm looking at is I see an instruction that may not be identical, but sure looks pretty close to being identical. All right? That is, convert amount equals amount times something. How many times does that appear in here? A bunch. All right? So, and what's the difference about it? What's the difference in the instruction? The difference in the instruction is simply, well, convert amount equals something times amount, the something that I'm multiplying it by. So in terms of thinking about creating methods that was mentioned, functions, that adds to the reusability, that also adds to the maintainability. The formula to calculate the currency conversion is the same for every conversion. The answer equals the input times the rate. All right? Plain and simple. So, one thing I could do is I could write a method that gives me the rate. All right? Right now I have a massive massive if statement that looks and has it hard-coded in the rate. All right? If I could write a method that says rate equals determine rate and pass it some arguments, then I could simplify a lot of code. I could get rid of a lot of input statements. Or, why do I keep saying input? If statements. All right? So, let's look at what we can do in this regard, one step at a time. So the two things I want to change is I want to get rid of this duplicated statement over and over and over again. And I want to, what am I going to say? I want to get rid of the fact that I have the rates listed a bunch of times. All right? Now, another thing to keep in mind as we're doing this, that, has anyone ever heard the term gold plating something with regards to software? All right, well, you know, obviously gold plating jewelry, we know, we have an idea what that means, but gold plating software is like refactoring gone crazy. It's like trying to make something like perfect when, hey, we made it really good. Is it worth X amount of time to make it a small percentage better? So refactoring does have its limits. And I mean, theoretically, you can analyze algorithms to say which algorithm is more efficient. All right? And we know good programming practices, and we can analyze it from that perspective. But there's also a practicality factor in there too. You know, if there's a deadline, all right, and your boss says that it needs to be done by a certain time, it might not be perfect, but you may have refactored it sufficiently. And it's maintainable. Yeah, you could maybe gain a bit of efficiency, or you could maybe make it a touch more reusable and so on. I guess what I'm saying is software development is a practical skill. It's a practical art. So therefore we can talk about some things theoretically, but some of that's going to get trumped by some practical concerns. What that relates to in this case is we're going to take the refactoring so far. We could probably take it further, and I could probably spend, I don't know how many lectures writing like the absolute best currency conversion I can that's maintainable, and all you have to do is look at it and it knows how to convert the currency rates, right? But we just want to take it so far, and again, especially given the context that I'm just interested in looking at some overriding principles of what makes this good. Now, what does this relate to your labs? In your labs, you have lab 3 and 4 that are related. One, the first lab, you are calculating tuition, similar to what we're doing here. In your second lab, you're to make a custom class, which maybe we'll get to today, or maybe we'll get to on whatever our next class is, Tuesday. The first one, do it however you can. The second one, let's try to think in terms of refactoring and how maybe you can, as you convert it to a custom class, how maybe you can make the code just a tad more, a tad better. All right, so first things first. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to get rid of the fact that I have the conversion rate a couple of times in here. Notice one thing. I think we did this right from the start. I don't think we really, at least the way that I put in like 0.63 over 0.75. I expressed all the rates in terms of $1. All right? So in other words, I'm not storing, and I don't have anywhere in here, it's calculated the exchange rate between a euro and a pound. All right? I don't have stored what the value of 0.63 over 0.75 is. If I did, that would make it more difficult still, because if the pound changed, I would have to change some things and not change others and so on. It could be really confusing. So I did that right sort of from the start. All right? You could have had, so in essence I have three conversion rates. The convert from dollar to dollar, which is a no-brainer, right? It's one. The conversion from pounds to dollar, oh wait a minute, dollars to pounds actually. And then I have dollars to euros. All right? Now, what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to put a second button on here. All right? And I'm going to put a second button and the second results just so I can test to make sure that I didn't break anything. Right? I got code that works. Let's leverage that code into checking out and making sure that whatever enhancement we make continues to work. So I'm going to put a button here. And I'll call that new method. Oops. Now, of course, if you're doing this for real, you wouldn't need to have two methods of calculating, right? One would be sufficient. But I'm just going to do this so that we can see both pieces of code at the same time and verify and test it. And I'm going to then create a second results field as well. I do not want to do that. So, I'm going to go to start out and simply copy the code from one place to another. So we have the same starting point. And I'll run it just to make sure it doesn't matter which button I press, I get the same answer. So $22 to pounds. 22 equals 13.86. New method. Oh, I need to change the label. $22 to pounds. 13.86. 13.86. Okay, so I didn't break anything in copying it over. So now I'm going to go and I'm going to start refactoring. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable up here for the conversion rate. .63, right?
Yeah, 'cause you did a count. to do it like that. I don't know if you ever heard of the private constant rate, like, you know how you do that too?
Have I ever heard of it? Let me think.
Well,
Yeah, I have heard
no,
of
I'm
it.
not like that. but-
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second.
Okay.
All right. So now what I can do is I can do this. Converted amount equals dollar rate times amount. Converted amount equals pound rate times amount. Euro rate euro rate. That's pound rate. This is dollar rate. All right. So let's go and run this now and make sure it still works. $22 to pounds. Old method gives us that. New method gives us that. So we didn't break it. Look how much easier that is to change if someone says, hey, look, something happened in the UK and the rate of the pound has gone up or down. One place to change it. That makes me feel good when I only have to do something once, right? A lot of good programming skills is a form of inspired laziness, all right? And it's laziness because if I can get something done quickly, that's better for the organization, right? Because it doesn't cost so much to change. And it's also better for the application because I'm less prone to error. If that number changed to, let's say, 0.69, all right? Previously, I would have to change it in 4 places. Now I only have to change it in 1. So I'm less likely to make a mistake, all right? So we've made big strides in improving the maintainability of this just by doing this. Now, the question was, could I make something, can I do something, because that's really not a variable, right? I mean, it's a variable in that it can change over time, but it's not a variable in the sense that it's going to, change within my application. In other words, I don't want to be able to do something like this. All right, in my code and change it, or maybe down here somewhere, throw some code. So I want to create something that is like a variable, but I can't change. And how do you do that? It's called a constant. And what's the syntax for that? Put final here? Is that right?
CONST.
Yeah, and I think it's all caps too.
Yeah, well, it doesn't have.
No?
The naming convention is generally caps for constants.
Yeah.
And again, as was pointed out, usually you make all caps. So I'll do that. That's just sort of a sign that, hey, this is a constant, this isn't a variable, you ain't allowed to change this. It's not absolutely necessary. I hope there's a search and replace. Yes. it so user-friendly that no one can possibly figure it out. All right. Again, keep in mind that capitalization is just a convention. The real important thing we did here is we made it a constant. So if I had an instruction in here that tried to change the value of dollar rate, oops. All right, gives me a red squiggly there. All right, if we read that, it says the left-hand side of assignment must be a variable property or index, blah, 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 blah. Essentially what that's telling you is I declared it a constant, so I can't change it. So by making it a constant, someone can't accidentally change it in their code, thinking that they're doing something smart. All right, it's you as a developer saying, hey, don't touch this variable. All right, it has a value, and we're sticking with it. All right, so let's, again, double check that this still works. This is called, again, regression testing. All right. Not really adding any functionality here. I'm just making sure I didn't break it. That the new calculation still works. All right, and we're in business. So, we took care of one of the problems. And one of the problems was the repetitiveness of the rate. Now, how did we know that that was a problem? By using our imagination and saying, what if that rate changes? What am I going to have to do? It's a good way to find opportunities to refactor, is to play the mental game of, what if this changes? What do I have to do to fix it? All right? And then you take steps to correct that if it seems to be a lot. What do I mean by a lot? Ideally, I mean if it's more than one thing that you have to do, all right, see if there's a way you can get it down to one. And that's not always possible, but in this case, we made it so that if the currency rate changed, we'd only have to change it in one place. And that's good. All right? And again, even if we were pulling this from a database, okay, we replace this statement up here with a statement that pulls that value from a database somewhere. And okay, but we still only have to put that one place. If, like, where we get it in the database changes, we only have to change one place. All right. So one thing we noticed is if we change the rate, we previously would have had to make a bunch of changes. What's our other potential issue here as far as making a change?
What happens if you don't take euro anymore and you change it again?
Yeah, what happens, or more than likely, if we want to add yen to the list. All right? But that's a point well taken too. We could potentially eliminate currencies. Probably more likely is we would add things on here, as it became, as our business expanded and say we started doing business in Asia, all right, we might want to consider yen where we didn't consider it before. So, if we play that imagine game, we're going to get a headache pretty quick, right? Because imagine if we added yen. I'm not going to do this, but let's imagine. SpongeBob would say we're going to use our imagination. All right. We'd have to add the yen rate here. That's one thing. Well, that's not so bad. All right. We're then going to have to duplicate this block. We have to add it to the drop down too. That's also not so bad. We're going to have to duplicate this block